Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Today we continue our interview with Belle Wheelan, President of the Southern Association of College and Schools Commission on Colleges. Belle's career spans over 40 years and includes the roles of faculty member, Chief Student Services Officer, Campus Provost, College President, and Secretary of Education for the state of Virginia. We continue last week's interview to talk about the future of accreditation in higher education. Belle, we had a wonderful conversation last week. Let's keep it going. We were talking right about accreditation and who sets standards and things like that. It kind of leads us into a lot of criticism about the accreditation process.
And I think that criticism comes from a misunderstanding of accreditation and why we do it and how we do it. Accreditation is not new by any stretch of the imagination. Our association's been around since 1895.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've always had, and I'm not a proponent of saying we've always done it that way. That's not what I mean by any stretch of the imagination, but there has always been a differentiation between what's the role of the federal government in higher ed, what's the role of the state government in higher ed, and what's the role of the accreditor or the institutions in higher ed. And that triad,
a three-legged stool.
It is indeed. That triad has been in place forever, but now it feels like, and maybe because I'm sitting on that stool, that one of the legs is trying to get longer than the other two and shift the power and balance of, what that triad does. So I don't know. I don't know how to fix it. I don't feel like I'm in this by myself. I think if you read Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle, Diverse Issues, any of the rags, you will see that this is a national issue. This is not something that is just in the South. Everybody across the country is kind of going, what is this? There's a perception that higher ed is not necessary anymore, that it is not for that public good. And people who don't have a college education seem to be the ones who are speaking loudest about we don't need higher education. I provided for my family without going to college. Why can't you provide for yours? Well, because the economy is different. The requirements for jobs are different. And I'm not sure that there's any 21st century job, even of the traditional jobs, that you can get nowadays without some kind of training beyond high school. My own son, when, it's been forever because he graduated from high school in 2002. So 20 years ago when he went to college, he wanted to go into automotive technology. Well, I'm familiar with shade tree mechanics where, you had a box of wrenches and, something to raise the car and you could get on there and fix anything. You don't fix cars anymore. You replace circuit breakers. And you can't learn how to do that without going through some kind of training beyond high school. Even folks who work in domestic jobs, you can't just dump stuff down the drain anymore because the EPA will hang your organization out to dry. So there's nothing out there anymore that you can do and make a living well enough to take care of your family without some kind of training. And in this country, that training still happens in our colleges and universities.
As it should, whether it be a higher ed or it be a community college or whatnot, it should take place. This is one of the legs of the stool.
Exactly. But the whole perception of that has turned around, and it's getting tougher and tougher to overcome or to explain to people, and I don't know if it's because higher ed is so expensive that people figure it's not worth the money, or if they just don't think higher ed has a value. Or maybe somewhere in between those two ideologies. I don't know, but it's evident in the declining enrollments that are around. It's evident in the people who are choosing not to go back to work. I heard someone say the other day, we have twice as many jobs available as we do people to fill them. There's no reason for that. If you want to work, there's got to be a job out there, but you are going to have to be trained in order to move into it. And right now, best way to get trained is to go to college.
And the stats are out there. Somebody's going to earn $1.2 million more with a undergraduate degree than they would if they just had a high school degree. I mean,
Yep.
the facts are there.
I know. Maybe those people don't read those same facts.
Well, it could be because of COVID, they just didn't learn how to read. I don't know.
No. Perhaps. I don't know. There has been a loss of skill set because of COVID.
Yeah.
From K-12 through colleges. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, faculty are having to do things very differently now because of the loss of learning during COVID. Yep. It's creating new things, and it puts more stress on you as an accreditor to make sure that student learning outcomes are being met.
Yes, definitely. So I have job security for a while if I want it, because there's enough stuff going on out there, that's for sure.
For sure. So what are those hot buttons you're dealing with?
Well, like I said, probably the biggest one right now is the politicization of higher education and, states stepping into areas that historically they have not stepped. Mm-hmm. Student enrollment decline is one. Not just their skill sets, but the number of students coming to college is another one. I think that governance is still an issue because they're responsible for the financing of institutions as well. And if you don't have enough money, you can't hire enough people or qualified people. And so your students are not going to show up. I mean, it's a domino effect no matter, what institution you're in. The micro-credentialing is a biggie right now with non-higher education entities providing educational opportunities. Mm-hmm. And curriculum, and trying to figure out how can we get that infused into institutions of higher education's traditional degree programs.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you on that one because at the last NEGREG, which I don't think you were at, but one of your colleagues was there. I don't remember if it was this last one or 2019, talking about the 50% rule for curriculum coming in. This one.
Yeah, that was this one, and Heather Perfetti from Middle States was the formerly known as regional accreditors representative. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was a major pushback because they wanted to up that to be able to 75 or even 100%.
Exactly. Some of our institutions cringed at the fact that that number was reduced as well, because you have especially smaller institutions that may be located in a rural area or an area that's difficult to get to, and so trying to find a welding faculty member or a political science faculty member, unlike Austin, Texas, that has, a plethora of people hanging around because they're spouses of people who already work at those institutions. And so you've got a big pool of people from which to choose. But those institutions that don't, it makes their students' lives a lot easier when there is an entity out there that offers that they will come in and provide it to their institutions. The other issue is distance learning. You have institutions that were not offering courses via distance prior to the pandemic. And so for an educational entity to come in and say, hey, I can do that for you, was a great help to those particular institutions. But we still held the institution responsible for the quality of whatever was coming in, because their name was the one, that institution's name was the name going on that credential, not the educational entity that was providing the instruction.
And it was their faculty member who was delivering it, usually.
Well, sometimes it was actually a qualified person from the non-higher ed entity that was offering it. But we told the institutions, but those faculty or those instructors have to meet the same qualifications that they would if you hired them as a faculty member. Mm-hmm. Same thing's happening with dual enrollment. That created a furor a few years ago because we have a lot of high schools where, let me back up. In 2002, we got rid of the requirement that said if you're going to teach a college class, you have to have a master's degree and 18 graduate hours in whatever you were going to teach. because there were fields like IT that were sprouting up for which there was no master's degree. But you could get experience and come in and teach something. Or, you could have been a banker for 20 years, a successful banker, but you have a bachelor's degree, surely you can teach intro to banking. So we changed it so that, if an institution still wanted to use a master's in 18 hours, they could certainly do that. Otherwise, we leave it up to an institution to make a case for why a faculty member should be able to teach. Well, in dual enrollment classes, which are college classes for which a student can get both high school and college credit, oftentimes are taught by high school teachers. But those high school teachers still have to meet the qualifications of a college faculty member because they're getting college credit for it. Oh my God, you'd have thought we asked for the firstborn child of some of those people. And when I say we, I don't mean just here in SACSCOC. All of the regionals got pushed back because the teachers didn't have, a master's degree. And we said, they don't have to have a master's degree in our region, but you do have to have something that qualifies them to do it. They've been teaching 20 years with excellent evaluations, something. They've developed 18 courses that have got, So, yeah, we hold them all responsible for meeting those qualifications.
That's important. Governance is another one, and board independence.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially for appointed boards that are appointed by governors and or state legislatures, because they feel obligated to do whatever the governor or the legislature wants them to do. And I will always caution boards that I would hope that governors and legislators would put you on the board, maybe because you share a political ideology, but also because you're qualified to serve as a board member. You've got enough life experiences that you know how to run a corporation or know what needs to be done or can at least figure it out, and that they would trust your judgment. And sometimes you may have to say, Governor, thank you for that information, but I've got some additional information that you may not have. And so I'm hopeful that you'll trust me to make that decision. You may then get kicked off the board. That is an option. But you will leave with your integrity and you will have protected the institution, which is the role of the board member. It's to protect the institution from undue influence, not to do what, those undue influencers want you to do.
And that comes up with donors as well.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I especially in my private schools, I tell them, when you have a donor who says, I need you to do such and such, you say, when you give me $30,000 or $5 million, I'll be glad to do what you say. Otherwise, oh well, because a lot of times it's folks who they can't understand why things are so much more expensive than they were when they were in school. Well, kind of, again, it's the economy, stupid. Let's go back. Inflation has set in. I graduated, I just celebrated my 50th college reunion. 50th. My God, 50 years. I can't imagine. I refuse to accept that on some days.
Well, you graduated when you were 10.
Yeah, you're kind. But tuition was a lot cheaper then than it is now. Steel was a lot cheaper than it is now. Even all the red bricks that are at Trinity from where I graduated are more expensive now than they were 50 years ago. And so, yeah, I need more money. And just because, you want me to be competitive and you want us to have the best and brightest students, I need more money to get that done. So, you just have to make that case, but it's not always easy. The logic does not prevail in a political environment. And that's political with a small p, not with a capital P, because donors make it political, students make it political, legislators make it political, but you have to be able to make that case.
Yeah. Well, I think your comments about the public boards are very, very prescient. There is so much right now. And I always come back to, having sat on boards, working with boards, et cetera, it's got to be about the student and the institution, and being able to tell that governor or that legislature, you appointed me to do this job, let me do it. It's critical.
Well, interestingly, that is true. With those boards that are elected, there's a different issue, if you will, that now they feel like they have to represent their constituents because they're generally elected by districts or, by a particular area of the city. And we have to help them understand once you get on the board, everybody is your constituent, not just the people who elected you. And so you still have that. I have to make sure that, the east side is taken care of, the west side is, you need to make sure that all the students in your in your institutional's catchment area are taken care of. So there are trade-offs either way. With private institutions, there are a lot of alumni on the board oftentimes, and they stay on boards longer than public college members do, and trying to get them to, change with the times and to understand the changing. I met with a board the other day. One of the board members has been on that board 53 years. And
Yeah.
it's like, why? Why have you not groomed somebody to take your place? So there are all kind of challenges. Yep,
The independence is always a critical. It doesn't matter
it is.
whether it's public, whether it's private.
Yep, large or small.
Yeah, and the challenge that I see with many public boards is they don't realize that they are actually the board of directors for a Fortune 1000 company.
Well, and sometimes board members have never been board members of anything before. It's interesting because sometimes board members use their position on the college or university board as a stepping stone for future political gain as well, because now my name is out there and so I can run for office, with total disregard for the institution itself. I understand, but if you do a good job for the institution, then yes, you probably could go to another position, but that should not be your motivation for working on this institution's board. The institution should be your primary consideration at that
Mm-hmm.
particular point. So it's different motives, different ways of carrying it out. And I have been both an administrator and a board member. So I like to think I know the difference.
Oh, yes. Strategic versus management boards. We probably don't want to go there with this one.
No, not today.
So where do you see accreditation going?
Well, my crystal ball is a little foggy today. It's partly cloudy here in the Decatur, Georgia area, so I'm not quite sure I know. I think we will continue to try to respond to innovations or new ideas as they come along, while still ensuring that institutions can carry out what they say they want to do. I think we will still represent the voice of the institutional members in what they perceive to be quality within an institution. If that changes, if we have any changes in our standards, that's where it will arise. Even these two areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and shared governance that are being reviewed with this set of principles review came from the membership. So I think we'll continue to be the voice of those institutions. As long as the partnership exists with the federal government, we'll have to be responsive to whatever federal rules that come in. You alluded to the 90-10 rule with for-profit institutions and
The 50% rule
that,
for the
yeah, with
OPMs.
the entities, exactly. And anything else they come up with, we'll have to make sure that our institutions are responsive to those. So,
How do you see colleges keeping the cost down for students? Is there a way?
As long as for public institutions, as long as states continue to fund them at the level they do, then I don't know how the cost stays down. When I first went to Virginia in 1987, the General Assembly was funding 70% of the cost of educating a student. Today, I think it may be 10% if it's that high. 20 years ago, when we started this no tax increase mantra across the country, where we're not going to raise taxes, then the pie didn't get any bigger. And yet the expenses got bigger for things like public works and jails and other things for which the states are responsible. And higher ed was a nice to have as opposed to must have. And so they started cutting how much they contributed to higher ed. But they still want the same quality of programs, and they still want, to be able to turn out the same kinds of educated populace, but they weren't putting as much money. Well, who gonna pay for it? Somebody's got to pay for it, so it gets passed on to the students. And the cost of running an institution of higher ed escalate annually, just like they do in your own home or in your own business. So I don't know where that's coming from. There's got to be some kind of major overhaul, though, in the funding or financing of higher education. And I don't know. Right now, it's based on, student head count and has been forever. And I mean, that's obviously not keeping up with the economy. So I don't know. Didn't I tell you the last time we spoke that I wouldn't go back to being a college president today because that'd be one of the things about which I'd have to worry. I mean, it's real. It is real, and I'm not minimizing it, but I don't know.
I don't think anybody knows, which is why we're in this situation. Nobody likes to pay taxes, but that's where we finance higher education, at least in the public sector, is from taxes.
I agree. And even the small contributions that private institutions get from states, have not always kept up with the rate of inflation either. And so while I'm sure they appreciate the amount of money they get, it'd be nice for it to have an increase there. And that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, well, the Great Recession back in 2008 really put a damper on higher ed funding. And
Yep.
I haven't seen it really recover since then.
Yeah, I know. That's why I told you retirement's looking better and better.
Well, Belle, this has just been wonderful. I really appreciate your taking the time. What wisdom do you have to impart to university presidents and boards? I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah. Continue to focus on the students, because that's the reason we're all in this business, is to help students make a better life for themselves. And as presidents, to ensure that the right curriculum is in place, the right faculty and staff are there to provide those instructional and support services are there, and the facilities are there, is what you're there for. And for boards to make sure that they hire the right president to move that institution forward and to keep an eye on the finances of the institution. As long as we remember that it's for the students that we're doing this, then I think it makes the sacrifice worthwhile.
Higher ed has a huge responsibility to train that next generation. It's all about the students.
That's exactly right.
So, what's next for you, my friend?
Oh, well, I'm going home to get some dinner right about now. Beyond that, I haven't thought a lot about it. I am looking toward retirement. Like I said, this is my 48th year in higher ed, and I think it's time for somebody perhaps with newer ideas or at least more energy than I have on many days to come in and address the issues. But I still have some things that I want to do, and I may have a paper or two. My son asked me to write a book about all the lessons that I tried to teach him growing up, because he doesn't think children today, have the same kinds of values. And I asked him why he didn't write the book. He said, "Well, you have the name recognition. I don't." So,
so you write it, and I'll put my name on
there
it.
You go. There
Co-author.
You go. Yeah, there you go. So I don't know. I haven't thought about it right now. I have plenty to keep me occupied as long as I sit in this office. So we'll worry about the future later. My whole career has not been planned. The opportunities have just presented themselves, and so I'm hoping that that's what happens toward the end of my career, just as it did toward the beginning.
Well, you have been a trailblazer for many, many people, a mentor for many. Thank you for all your years of service, and it's always a pleasure chatting with you.
It's been mine. Drumm, you take care.
You too, my friend. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to Belle Wheelan for giving us so much of her time and for her sharing her perspectives on accreditation and higher education. Thanks, Belle. Always a pleasure. Our next guest is Dr. Nathan Long, president of Saybrook University. Saybrook is a feel-good story about how a small institution focused on its mission did the market research, and started new programs that align with its special purpose and market demand to turn itself around. It's a great feel-good story, and don't miss it, folks. Until next time.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.